Hi, everyone. My name is Anna, and I teach Chinese language immersion in 4th grade at a public school here in Utah. And so, being in the elementary school, we're all about the word walls. And so, my presentation today is about using a word wall to develop language proficiency in the Chinese immersion classroom, but hopefully, what I say is applicable to a variety of contexts. And I'm also hoping to learn from you about how you enhance your vocabulary instruction in different contexts. I've taught at the same school for 9 years, which I love. It's a great context, but I also know that my perspective is limited in that sense. So I'm hoping that we can all learn from each other. So, first of all, just a quick overview, refresher course of vocabulary instruction. There's lots of different approaches to teaching students vocabulary, and it ranges from the implicit, which usually includes, extensive reading or comprehensible input approaches, to explicit, where you give students a list of words. These are the words you need to know, memorize them, fill in the blanks on the unit test. And then we also have the incidental versus intentional spectrum, which incidental is, as the words come up in the class, as you have a need to use the language, you teach that vocabulary item to the students, or intentional, which is very structured and planned. Typically or traditionally, a word wall approach is more of the explicit and intentional approach, where you have a list of words that students need to know and produce or read, depending on what your course objectives are. But I found that you can also use a word wall for more implicit and incidental and communicative approaches, if you're intentional about how you approach that. In my context, we have a textbook or a series of leveled readers for reading and writing vocabulary, but we don't necessarily have a mandated curriculum for our oral language. So in my context, the reading and writing vocabulary is definitely more on the explicit, intentional side, but because I teach in an immersion classroom, every day we're interacting and the children are learning implicitly and incidentally. And I think with vocabulary instruction, as with a lot of different areas of language teaching, flexibility is important. You adjust according to the needs of the students, according to the content, and according to their proficiency levels. So, what is a word wall? A word wall is an ongoing, organized display of keywords that provides visual reference for students. So at its most basic, you just print out a vocabulary card or even a flashcard, stick it on the wall. But word walls can also be quite complex, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with interactive word walls, and that's a concept that's introduced by Harmon, Wood, and Kaiser. And an interactive word wall is more of the ongoing reference that is referred to above, where students might create their own cards to put on the word wall. They draw their own pictures or symbols to explain the concept, and then they refer back to it through a variety of proficiency-based tasks or communicative activities. So this is my word wall. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, pause first. I'd love to hear from you. Let's share in the chat. Do you have a word wall in your classroom? If you do, why did you decide to do that? If you don't, is that an intentional decision or just something you've never incorporated? But I'd love to hear your experiences with a word wall for teaching vocabulary.
I really like the idea of a word wall. I just haven't really had any ideas for how to incorporate it.
Okay.
A lot of it is also I just have not had the time to even get my room organized and decorated in a way that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of one of the last things on
versus
my
the
list
reality
of things to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to see how I even see the chat in this view. Any tips here?
It's the little speech bubble. There's like a bar and there's like the microphone and the camera and the share, and then there's the little speech bubble. I don't know if you can see it while presenting though. But I put in the chat that I have a bulletin board.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
Oh, I just have a bulletin board with like the high frequency verbs in Spanish.
Oh.
And then in like present and past tense. And then I have like the question words above my whiteboard, but it's not really a word wall, but it's words on a wall.
So multiple walls. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And I point a lot to them as I'm talking. So
perfect. Love it. All right. So kind of what I've found is that there's lots of different ways to organize your word wall, and I think some are more effective than others depending on what your course objectives are. So we're going to do a little quick activity, and I'm hoping this works. But, oh, and I'm going to need the chat to share this link. All right. Luca, any tips on how I can access the chat?
You should be able to see a bubble at the top. I do not know in presenter view where that would be. If you see the 3 dots as well at the top of your page, clicking those 3 dots could bring up all the different options, including the chat.
Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Whoa, that came out really big, but there's the link.
Oh, wow.
And
it's having us make a copy. Is that what you wanted?
yes.
Okay.
All right. So this link just takes you to a Google slideshow where there's some different words. And this is just to kind of start thinking about different possible ways you can organize vocabulary items. And obviously these are in English because that's our common language of this this conference. But I'm going to give you just 45 seconds to play around with those and see how you might organize these different words in a way that would make sense to you. And then if you want to share which categories you decided or how you decided to arrange those in the chat or in video, since I'm struggling with the chat apparently. All right, what are you finding? What seems to make sense for you to organize these words? Mari? Yeah, go ahead, just speak it.
So I separated them into persons, objects, and adjectives. Because now it seemed like too many.
Yeah. Any other approaches?
I was really stuck with where to put car and uncle because I kind of went with like astronaut, star, uniform because those are kind of like, I don't know, like an astronaut needs a uniform probably, and they go and see stars. And then I had a category of adjectives, and then dancer, shoes, and costume because those kind of go together. So I wasn't really sure what to do with car and uncle.
Yeah. So I just made up these words randomly, but I when I approached it, I was kind of thinking of it more like Megan was with themes. But I think my point is that there's lots of different ways to organize words and depends on what your objective is. Okay, I'm going to try and go back to sharing. Please tell me if this works right.
Working.
Okay, thank you.
Looks good.
Thank you. So here are some examples of different word walls that I have encountered. And when deciding how to organize your vocabulary, and this kind of goes back to what Megan was mentioning earlier about syllabus design, is it depends what your objectives are. So you consider the course outcomes, the curriculum, the particular vocabulary items you want your students to learn, the target language, and their specific proficiency levels. So on the left, you have an alphabetic word wall and that's from one of my coworkers who teaches first grade English. And so her objective is to teach her students to read. They already speak English, but now they're learning how to decode and encode simple words. So in her context, she wants to have a form-focused approach where they're thinking about words in relation to their sounds and their spellings. Excuse me. Then the poster on the right is one for my classroom, which is thematic. So if you're talking about weather, these are some words you might need to use in order to get your meaning across. All right. In my particular context, I teach Mandarin Chinese to fourth graders. So the students L1, generally speaking, with very few exceptions in my particular community, they all speak English at home, which is linguistically very distant from Mandarin. So they come in with a very limited vocabulary. There's not a lot of cognates between English and Chinese. So vocabulary can be difficult. It's also a non-alphabetic language. So the orthography is challenging. And so what I'm really trying to teach my students to connect the sound of the word and the meaning of the word and the form of the word through memorization. Also, I teach in an immersion program, so I'm supposed to speak 100% in the target language. And my students are also supposed to speak 100% in the target language to each other. So that means I never give a translation for a vocabulary item. And it's all very visual and multisensory and based on what we encounter in our readers. And I never send home a vocabulary list of these are the words you need to know. And these are their English translations because it's all in the target language. Also, I teach 9 and 10-year-olds. So the vocabulary items need to be applicable to them, what's interesting to them, what's something that they can talk about, something that they're engaged in their day-to-day life. So here's a picture of the word wall in my classroom. I took this picture a couple weeks ago. So the way that I have decided to divide my word wall up is in lexical categories, kind of similar to what many of you did on that earlier exercise. I have people, things, animals, time, places, adjectives, and verbs. And the word wall starts out blank at the beginning of the year, and then we add to it as the year goes on. So when we start a new unit, I put the key vocabulary words on the whiteboard. Then at the end of the unit, we move them from the whiteboard to the word wall. And a lot of times it can become a fun and interesting activity to help the kids help me sort the words onto the word wall. And so a little metacognition is involved there. They think about, oh, where does this word fit? How do I use this word? Where does it make sense to go? I don't put every word the students are supposed to know on the word wall, obviously. But I put, the key content words related to what we're talking about, and also some of the high frequency function words, just based on common usage and what I think that they will need to know how to read and write. As far as actual vocabulary cards, I try and keep it really simple. I just have the word and a picture, which is easy if it's a concrete item like train. This is from our transportation unit. Train, bike, roller coaster, plane. You have the word and the picture, and that's simple and accessible for the students. But when it's an abstract word, I do also include a picture. So on the right, you can see the empty shopping cart picture is for the word mail, or to not have, like the negative of to have. And there is some research that shows that using a visual image will enhance retention of these abstract words, specifically for Chinese language learners, but I'm sure that's applicable in a variety of other contexts. And obviously, I don't just show them a picture of an empty shopping cart and expect them to know what the word means, but it's something that we explain and we talk about, and they're getting, multiple varied multisensory and contextualized exposures, but they do have this icon that can go back. So when they need to recall this word or retrieve this word, they have a mental image to go with it. All right, so once I have the words up on my word wall, there's a lot of different things that I do to engage with it and to make it more than just a decoration on my wall and to make it more interactive. So I like to use oral language games to help review and reinforce, and again, to give students multiple exposures to these words in meaningful contexts. So for listening comprehension, when I'm talking, especially at the beginning of the unit, and we're talking about a topic relative to, some of these vocabulary items, I just point to the cards for the visual support. Another fun activity we do is a comprehensible input draw, where, and this is a great activity if you have extra 5 minutes at the end of class, or, we don't have time to start the lesson we had originally planned, so let's do this instead. Or I just use the words on the word wall to create a silly sentence, and the students have to draw what the sentence means. Like, for example, 3 dinosaurs play baseball in the rain. And so then they have to draw that on their whiteboard. They love it, and I can immediately tell which students understand which words and which students need some more practice. So it's a great formative assessment, and it's also a way for them to engage the multisensory learning. Similarly, we could do some word elicitation games like charades, Pictionary, Taboo, to practice the vocabulary in a way that's more than just reading through the words on the word wall. Also, in daily conversations, formal and informal, we refer back to the word wall as the words come up in class. And when we're viewing authentic materials, we can also look for those vocabulary items in the authentic materials, especially since Chinese is not a phonetic language. It can be really overwhelming for students to see a page with a bunch of words that they've never seen before. And so I really encourage them to find the words they do know in those authentic materials. And again, in daily conversation, we also like to use creative language. So sometimes they'll make up their own sentences and have someone else draw it, and asking meaningful questions related to their lives. So these are some of the ways that I've found I can use the word wall to support oral language. And a lot of this goes into my goal to help my students develop circumlocution skills, where you use the language you know to talk around the language you don't know. And this is especially important in my immersion classroom because my students are not supposed to speak English at all, and I'm supposed to enforce that. And it's part of my evaluation. When my principal walks into my classroom, he expects to hear no English. So the way I teach my students to circumlocute is first by asking questions based on those categories on the word wall. So if they're trying to say something, they can't say it, or if they do say it in English, then I ask them questions. Is it a person? Is it an animal? Is it a thing? And then we'll ask them some of the adjectives. Is it big? Is it small? What color is it? And so this is to elicit their own descriptions of the words. And then eventually they get to the point where instead of just saying, I don't know how to say it, or speaking in English, they'll start to offer their own descriptions of the words that they're trying to use. And so that's my motto, is use the Chinese you know, use the Chinese you know. So they're using the language they do know to convey their meaning. And then as the teacher, I provide that vocabulary item, and now it's personal for them. And the word wall is a really good framework for those beginning questions and also for the ongoing references. And then as words come up repeatedly that the students want to know, that are important to them, we can add them to the word wall. So for example, a couple of years ago, I had a student who was obsessed with narwhals. He was obsessed. Every sentence he made, every picture he drew was about narwhals. So we added that to our word wall because that was something that came up in class on a regular basis. And that also gives the students, some voice and choice in the curriculum. Finally, the word wall can also help with written language development. And in reading and writing tasks, excuse me, in reading and writing tasks, the word wall can help to activate background knowledge. So as you're approaching a reading or listening text or a writing task, you can say, all right, what words do we think we might come across here? What words do we think we might use? It can also act as a dictionary. In vocabulary acquisition, there's the concept of the involvement load hypothesis from Laffer and Holstein. And that basically says that for students to retain a word, they need to have a need for it, they need to search for it, and they need to evaluate if it's the right word for them to use. And the word wall is a quick way for them to have a need, to search for it, and to pick out the word they need. Since my students are young and sometimes transitions are hard, I don't use dictionaries, and also because we're in immersion classroom. So the word wall allows them to put that involvement into learning the vocabulary in a practical way. And then as they're doing these tasks, they can work independently. And so the focus is on meaning over form. So they don't have to focus so much on how do I write this specific character? What's the stroke order? What's the radical that goes here? But they can use the word wall as a reference and focus on what they're trying to say. And then
we are about out of time.
Okay, perfect. And then implicit grammar instruction, my last item there is just that you can also consider the word order in your target language in what order you want to arrange the words on your word wall. So for example, in Chinese, we have the subject before the verb. So that's the order I put it on my word wall as well. In conclusion, what ideas do you have about word wall, or what questions do you have about how I've used a word wall or any of your other peers? Oh, I'm going to exit out so I can see the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, Luca. I missed your 2-minute marker.
Worries. No worries.
I'm really not sure what I did to avoid the chat.
I had a really quick question. So are you seeing the same kids all day, or do you see like different groups of kids, and are they all learning the same kind of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have 2 groups of students. I have a morning class and an afternoon class, but they are at approximately the same level. So from the word wall perspective, they're learning the same content, which is nice. Makes it easier for me.
So do you put like new vocabulary on the wall, or do you put like things that they should already know before coming to your grade?
Some of both. So it's like some of the high frequency function words, like the high frequency verbs, they have learned before, but I do include those on the word wall. But most of the words on the word wall are words that they're learning in my class.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, and apologize for the complications with the chat, but I've
No
loved
worries.
sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.